Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest edition of the Woke Bros. Of course, I'm your co-host, Big Waz, aka Wazzy Lambre, and I'm joined by a special co-host. Nando had an emergency, and our brother Ben Burgis of the Give Them an Argument podcast, as well as the book. Go pick that up. Give Them an Argument by Ben Burgis. What's going on, brother?
Not too, not too much. It's a nice day here in Atlanta. I'm actually sitting outside, so
That's wonderful.
Life is good.
So we've moved past the wintertime in Atlanta, thankfully.
Yeah, finally, yeah.
Yeah, I actually plan on making a trip out to Gwinnett to see my brother next month. So
no kidding.
We'll try to see if we can lock in at some point while I'm out there, because I'll probably do like a week or so. Whenever I go to Atlanta, I like to spend as much time as I can because I have a very special affinity for the city. So I want to get right into things because today we're taping this on the Wednesday, March 23rd. I was working out, and our brothers over at This Is Revolution podcast, Pascal Robert, fellow Haitian, one of the greatest Haitians in America today, in my humble opinion, Jason Miles, and they had a guest, Corey Robbins, professor at Brooklyn College, author, all of that. He's dope. He's official. And the topic was basically Corey Robbins was trying to explain that conservatism, movement conservatism specifically, in the American form or idiom or whatever you want to call it, is basically in decline, right? And he cites several different examples, and he's basically like, if you compare Trump to say what Reagan was doing, right, and how ascendant movement conservatism was in the 80s and even through the 90s onto Baby Bush, his presidency is just like, it's just a stark difference when you consider the two. And I would love to get, I know how I feel about it, but I really would love to get your feeling on it, because I think it is a very interesting topic, especially juxtaposed against the movement that people like you and I are trying to get off the ground over here on the left.
Yeah, I mean, I think one big thing that does hit me about that, if you think about the difference between you kind of start out with like maybe the Goldwater campaign, is like when like movement conservatism is really coming into its own, and then obviously you get that high point with Reagan, and then even for like a long time after that. I mean, like even like the 90s, the Newt Gingrich era, the 2000s, with Bush and the war on terror.
The presidency itself of Bill Clinton, just the fact of his presidency and how he governed is like, bro, this is a guy a Democrat completely and wholly subsumed by movement conservatism politics.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's like Margaret Thatcher supposedly was asked once what her biggest accomplishment was, and she said New Labour, meaning like the fact that like under Tony Blair, even the Labour Party, was had adopted so many of her assumptions, that was really the big
triumph. Hold on, Ben, I want to slow down because I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, especially for the woke bro listener. I want to explain what movement conservatism is. Like, we don't need to get all up in William F. Buckley and all of these clowns, right? But essentially, it's these homies who decide that they're sick of basically the revolution of the civil rights era. They're completely sick of New Deal era politics, and they basically decide that it's going to be how they're going to build a constituency, which I think is the smartest part of movement conservatism. Is we're going to get these libertarians who they believe in all of these wacky free market ideas, deregulation, et cetera, just complete whack job free market economics. We're going to get the religious right on board because they don't really have a home right now. The Jesus freaks, the God botherers, whatever you want to call them. And the final, most important component, the reactionary, anti-civil rights, poor white Southerners, et cetera, and it's basically these three groups under that umbrella, and they're like, we're gonna make this thing pop. Am I wrong in that?
No, I think that's totally right. I mean, I think I think anti-civil rights politics was like really in a lot of ways the thing that made it all work, because I mean, before this time period we're talking about, I mean, if you think about like the period of like the 30s up through you know, up through like the mid 60s, late 60s, you know, maybe even 70s some ways, right? Like that's a time when
the Democrats are just kicking their asses
just consistently.
like
yeah, like to a ridiculous extent. Like the only, you know, like that entire time period, right? I mean, like other than you know, basically, you know, FDR, Truman. I mean, like you get Eisenhower, but Eisenhower is to this period kind of what Clinton is to the conservative ascendancy, because he's a Republican, but he's not really going to challenge any of those.
He's like, we can't roll back this New Deal stuff. These people will riot. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, no, exactly. So, and you know, and even Eisenhower, I mean, even though he was doing things like, you know, supporting coups in Latin America and stuff like that, he was still, you know, he was still like,
of course, as one does, as a U.S. leader.
Sure. You know, but like even Eisenhower would say things like, you know, they owe all this money going to the military-industrial complex. We don't have enough for, you know, for social services, whatever. Like he was still like within the assumptions of a lot of that kind of New Deal, or what after Eisenhower, you know, under LBJ would be like Great Society liberalism. And that was just really dominant. Even like Nixon was kind of like that, like in a weird way, right? Like even though he was appealing to the energy of like the conservative crazies, you know, like to like he, I think Nixon says somewhere that if you really want to get something done, you know, you should find yourself a what did he say, a conservative enthusiast or something, like when he's talking about people like G. Gordon Liddy and, you know, like all those people who would like rally around him. But like really his politics, I mean, were still like very Eisenhower's when he got down to it, you know. So like what really starts to change is, you know, you mentioned William F. Buckley, he was like the big media conservative back then. We mentioned Barry Goldwater, you know, who ran unsuccessfully for president, and I mean, he was crushed in that election. But that still really like energized the ground troops, you know, that they wanted to.
Yeah, because, you know, being the nominee of one of two of the only major parties in the country, whether you win or not, your ideas, that platform it's money can't buy that shit.
No,
you know,
exactly,
like there's no other way to get those ideas out there. So like broadcast all over the country, all over the world, even than by being the nominee of the Republican Party, who still at that point was, you know, they were ran by these country club cats, the Rockefellers, the Romneys. These kind of guys were the ones who were in charge of the Republican Party before Goldwater. Like, look, like they were pro-business and all of that, but they were like, come on, man, you can't just lynch niggers. Come on, that's ridiculous. You can't just do that.
No, totally. I mean, like George Bush Sr. in I think in the 80s sometime, even like he's like supposedly he came into like a room of like evangelicals, like in a fundraiser or something, and said, "I guess I'm the only person here who's only born once," and like that's the country club, you know, Republicans,
right?
And so the people, I mean, the way that Bernie running for president, even though he didn't win the nomination either time, like still. But like Bernie running for president that first time, like was this huge shot in the arm for like, you know, what little, you know, real left there is in this country. Like the Goldwater was even more so for conservatism. He was the nominee. You know? So then they really feel like finally in 1980, you know, with Ronald Reagan, that they've got the president who's like really their guy. And even, I mean, like if you think about the 90s, I mean, like, you know, Clinton was completely existing within their world of like their politics. And it was like all of these sorts of Clinton versus Newt Gingrich kinds of wars that were going on were all about like, okay, so should we cut welfare by like 60% or only 50%? Right.
Right.
You know, like,
that was the fight. Exactly.
You know, so, and so I think about that, or, you know, or like the 2000s when, you know, even though Bush Sr. was like very much like an old school country club Republican, Bush Jr. was somebody they definitely thought was their guy. And, you know, when I look back at that, one thing that does kind of make me think that Corey is onto something, and about the sort of decline of movement conservatism, is that, I mean, whatever, it's obviously been wildly successful. Like, they got a crazy amount of the stuff they wanted, you know. But like, if you think about conservatives now, one thing that really hits me about that is that in a lot of ways, I feel like they've kind of lost faith in what they're selling, at least rhetorically, right? Like, I think like what they actually do when, you know, like when it's as LBJ would say, it's time for the ball cut in, right? You know, like when you're actually getting down to brass tacks and making decisions, what they do is the same stuff they ever did, right? But I think that, like, if you look at their rhetoric now, they are acting like they've kind of lost faith in the product. Like if you think about the way, like, watch like Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, like all of these guys have started doing this weird thing where they're like pretending to be populist now.
It's craziness.
You know,
it's insane. I mean, Tucker Carlson, like his whole anti-elitist shtick coming out of the mouth of this white bread country club like Ofe. I'm just like, this is like this is beyond the fucking pale. Like, you can't even suspend the disbelief when it's just like, Tucker Carlson, like, really, bro? Like, you about the people? You about the like, Tucker Carlson is the messenger for the everyman. And I think that the things that Corey talked about. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, I mean, the man is, you know, there's a Swanson food, you know, like,
I mean, it's ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
And I remember Tucker Carlson when he used to host, like, co-host Crossfire back in like the Bush years, and back then he was the ultimate, like, he was the, you know, the kind of conservative that guys on Chapo call a bow tie dipshit, you know, like he was that guy, right? I mean, he was the, you know, like, he was all about the free market economics and all that stuff.
Yes.
And now he's gone through this weird transformation where he pretends to be a populist. I see Ted Cruz using the phrase corporate media, like, instead of calling it the liberal media, so corporate media. You know, I see Charlie Kirk making this big deal about, you know, how he's supposedly some kind of anti-corporate populist, although, you know, I debated that guy last year, and I asked him, like, if he'd be willing to raise taxes on Jeff Bezos, who he says he hates, you know, by 1%. To like pay for housing for homeless veterans, and, you know, he like had to think about it for a minute, like,
which is, again, that's it. That's anathema to movement conservatism. And I think what Corey brought up too, which I think is a good point. He brought up the budgets. He's like, look at Trump's budgets. It's the same. It was the same as Barry's. Like, like, there's no, like, he didn't roll back anything. They didn't do anything. It was literally the exact same budgets, where like that could never have been the case, say, in like 1988, where like a movement conservative would have the exact same budget as a Democratic president. That doesn't make any sense. And for me, the reason why I tend to agree with Corey, and I think Pascal made the point of just like, look, man, these people are still pretty powerful, and they feel ascendant still, because look, like they can take on a new form in whatever we're calling Trumpism these days, right? And you can do shit like fuck up the Iran deal. You can do different. You can you know, pass your record-setting tax cuts. But where I tend to agree with you, and I agree with Corey, I think the tax cuts is instructive in the sense that it's the only thing they passed. They had 2 whole years of uninterrupted power, and they couldn't do nothing else. There's nothing else. They got their court, they got their judges too, which again, Mitch McConnell was like, look, all this shit we be talking about, trickle down and all of that, and welfare queens and that shit ain't working no more. We need to get these judges in here, lock the shit that we got right now in, and keep it pushing, because all that shit we've been pushing, it doesn't work anymore. Like, they all know it. That's why I tend to agree with what you guys are saying. And I think the main point, which is why I want to bring it, you know, to us on the left, is like, bro, that shit was a 40-year project. right? And we talking about like where these guys started sending out pamphlets, and they start like they started, this shit was a 40-year project, and it didn't always seem like it was working.
No,
you know, when Goldwater got his ass kicked, when Reagan ran the first time and got his ass kicked, like it didn't always seem like it was working, you know. But you know, to get back to why I tend to agree with you and Corey is that like they've won.
Yeah.
Like they've won so handily. Like they've deregulated the country to shit. The corporate tax rate is like, never have you seen it this low. You know, marginal gains and like all of this, like they won.
Yeah, I mean, like if you think about the deal, like when all this started in like this, you know, early '60s versus now, I mean, like in 2022, I mean,
they busted all the unions. Like,
it's like there's like less than 7% of like private sector workers are even in a union now. It's like they've just thoroughly won, right? Like they have, and which is why I think they need to focus on like kind of cultural grievances, you know, and you know, like whatever, you know, critical race theory and drag queen story hour and like whatever they're like obsessively getting angry about, you know, this week is because if you're actually talking about like bread and butter issues, like the actual distribution of resources in the material world, they have just completely won.
Yeah. And, you know, and I think what's important about what you just said too, Ben, is that, and it's something we talk about here on the show all the time, is like, again, proof perfect that this shit is different. The fucking unemployment insurance benefits that Trump passed, the stimulus checks, all of that shit, again, like this is anathema. This is the antithesis of austerity, conservatism. Like, stop giving these people free check. Like, they gonna get used to it. They gonna hold us to that standard forever. Like, this is the antithesis of what these people believed in. And like the reason why they go with critical race theory and trans people swimming on college swim teams and all of that is because, like, if we sat and said, yo, wasn't it dope when we had all of that shit? Wasn't it great? Like, if we sat and we talked about it and thought about it, you know, and everybody was just like, yo, this shit is amazing. Right. That would be a major problem. It'd be a major reversal of policies. Like, again, going back to Bill Clinton and the fucking crime bill and the welfare bill, like straight up and down. Like, that shit was 30 years ago, Ben. 30 years ago, all of this stuff happened. And that's why you see what you see. And that's why I think the left needs to get his act together, because, you know, I think conservatism is instructive. And obviously there's different problems that we faced and what the conservatives faced when they were starting their project. But I think it's very instructive.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? I mean, and I think for the conservatives, a lot of how they got it done, you know, you mentioned the people who would like send out the, you know, pamphlets through the direct mail.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of like kind of like grassroots stuff where a lot of it had to do with churches, a lot of it had to do with like, you know, like just taking over like PTAs and stuff like that, you know, and I think the big thing that a lot of times people don't talk about enough is if you think about like what it would take to actually like get some kind of like social democratic like anything in the US, like it's not, you know, like people doing what we do and just like talking about it, right? You know, like yeah. Unfortunately isn't
it's not we're close to enough. No,
it's not enough, right? So I think I think that what you actually need, like more than anything, I mean, like it's just like this is not interesting answer, but I think it's true answer is just an organized working class. But that's why I get so excited. I mean, it's a small thing, but like it's why I get so excited about all these Starbucks, you know, unionizing, you know, because if you don't have that kind of like organization of like working people, I mean, I think that's the only thing that could ever like actually have that kind of grassroots social base to get done, you know, anything, right? That we want, right? Because like otherwise, I mean, look at the way the Democratic Party is. I mean, they're not going to give a shit. Like,
no, and of course, well, we know that. And I think what you just said is a beautiful point, because you think about basically the evangelical part of the conservative movement. Like that's an institution. That's in many ways it's like a union. It's like these people are in community together. Like that's a community base. So like those people can move in concert with one another because they're already in community, right? Like they're already in communion. So it makes it more effective when you build a constituency out of people who are already in community with one another. Like they speak the same languages, they have the same customs and cultural mores. Like it like what you saying like kind of hits me right here when you think about the reverse of that. And again, like part of the problem, you know, from where I sit is that it's a lot easier to organize people who don't have shit than it is these professional class homies. Quite frankly, people in our peer group who can see the bottom, right, from where they are. Like as you're rising through the ranks, it's happened seamlessly. When you move into a bigger apartment, it's like, of course, I should have had this bigger apartment. When you got to go from a big apartment to a smaller one, that's a shock to your system.
Right.
You know, and I think like organizing these, especially these professional Negroes, oh my God, Ben, like the idea that those folks would ever go against the Kamalas and the Michelle Obamas and like those type of people, like it's like, and I'm around them a lot. I actually spent the weekend around a few of them. I'm just like, man, I don't know that these people sort of understand the class dynamics, and in so much as they do, there's no way that they would ever want to like threaten what they would perceive to be a threat to their class status.
Yeah. I mean, of course, right? I mean, this is the problem. I mean, this is why, like, book I always recommend to everybody is "Listen Liberal" by Thomas Frank, where he goes into the history of the Democratic Party since like the 70s and the way that, you know, with the decline of organized labor, you know, like who did the Dems pivot to as like their base? Basically, right? Not just the black ones, but basically the people you're talking about, right? Yeah. You know, that they have which is why, you know, which I think is all over. I mean, if you look at like, I mean, it's like, I don't know, think about 2016 when Hillary was running for president and like people were just like never shut up about how she was supposedly the most qualified candidate ever to like run for anything. And think, okay, I mean, one, it's not even really true. And so just forget that, right? Like that's like, it was so revealing that that's how they put it, right? Because how do these people
She's qualified? Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like
What are your degrees? How many degrees did you get?
Yeah, exactly, right. They think of it as like a technocratic job interview, and that's why like all these people you're talking about, like, and you know, the Democratic Party for that matter, right? Because that's who they're appealing to. You know, like what they've really done is they've redefined like justice not as raising the floor for like the great majority of people. They've but instead as getting the demographically appropriate chunk of every group, you know, like into the ruling class. Like
that's my problem with diversity, inclusion, blah 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 bullshit. All these people crying about what the board at Goldman Sachs looks like. It's just so fucking stupid, because I'm just like, you guys are okay with the underlying inequality so long as it's equitable. Like that doesn't make any sense. It the inequality is fine. It's fine.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean,
it's like fine. We just need more Negroes in Harvard. Duh.
yeah, right. Exactly.
And the masses of black people, the pride that they're gonna take in, you know, the black people that get to work at BlackRock and the black people that get to, you know, drop bombs on people's heads at the CIA. Like the masses of black people are just gonna feel amazing and be uplifted to Zion, Ben.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Because it's like none of this shit actually helps, like, the overwhelming majority of the population, right? Because like you can have, like, BiDef, you know, there are only so many, you know, it's like not every cheerleader can be on the top of the pyramid, right? You know, like you know, there are only so many spots as CEOs and politicians, and you know, or even like whatever Harvard educated lawyers, you know, that most.
By the way, and I think it has an even, so the effects are even on the other end of it. These BIPOC elites serve as reminders to those poor crackers in West Virginia, like, see, you see, they're passing you. Don't you see? Don't you see how fucked up this whole shit is? Like, it's twofold. It's like, one, it doesn't do anything for anybody.
Right.
And two, the group of people who we would be ostensibly trying to make community with as working class folks and poor folks are like, what they're seeing and what they're getting is like, look, niggas can be in the White House now. You know, so it has like it has a compounding effect from where I see it. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't.
Which again is not to say that. Look,
sure.
If you work in an elite institution, I want you to get your promotion. I want you to go from VP to SVP. I want to see it. It's great. I'm happy for you when it happens.
I mean, look, if you're my friend, I want you to have all those things. But if you, you know, like there's nothing, you know. I mean. Whatever. I mean, let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. I don't hate the player, but I do hate the game very much. You know, that the like there is, you know, I made sure, you know, succeed. You know, everybody, you know, you've got your life to live. You know, like you know, if you're succeeding within the rules of the game as that exist right now, great. But like if you have, but the question is, like, should these be the rules of the game? And if your only objection to the rules is that it's harder for some people than others to like climb to the top, then it's like, okay, then what about everybody at the bottom? You know, that they like, because most people, no matter how fair you make the competition, most people are still going to be at the bottom at the end of the day, and that's who I care about, you know, like that, like doing something, like helping the people who are at the bottom to actually achieve something. And I mean, I guess I think that like what it's going to take to get, you know, the, you know, whatever you just said, the poor crackers in West Virginia, you know, and the, you know, and poor black people in cities and whoever else, right? Like to, you know, to actually I guess accomplish anything.
Like the proper term, Ben, would be the toothless hayseeds. Is that better?
Yeah, that's right. So that's it. Like, like, yeah. I mean, like, if the toothless hayseeds, and you know, and the you know, what's the Clinton era phrase? The super predators are going to get together and actually do something to stop, you know, to do something to lift the floor for the majority of the population. You know, then I mean, I guess to me it seems like the mission, if you're in like media and you're trying to be, you know, whatever, like it's ultimately auxiliary. Like everything that actually has to happen is outside of this. It's on the ground, but like, if you want to be helpful to that, it seems like the things that you need to do are to push back against, you know, the people who, you know, was it like Adolf Reed and Walter Ben Michaels call, you know, the disparitarians, people who like only care about the disparities, right? And who gets to be in each position, right? Like to show that version of liberalism has nothing to do with justice as we understand it. It's also not even going to achieve anything. And then to try to expose like the right-wing pseudo-populist grifters, who are really just sort of trying to rebrand Reaganism, as like some kind of like anti-corporate populism somehow, and then to just remind everybody, right? You can't, like, they're never going to give you any of this stuff, right? I mean, like, the only way that you could ever get it is to have an organized working class that can take it.
Hey, man, and the last thing I'll say to our friends in the petty bourgeoisie, man, is just like, yo, listen, somebody I know was actually robbed here in LA. Some dudes ran up on him, took his watch. Like, I'm talking about in the 5 figures of valuables off of his person. Thankfully, he's safe, he's straight, he's not going to hit the poorhouse, he's going to be fine. But, what that said to me is, like, a lot of this shit that people, and I'm not talking about him specifically, I'm just talking about in generally, when it comes to certain, elites or whatever, a lot of the shit that they hold so dear and so precious, like, that shit is in peril every second that we continue to have a fucking put upon underclass, straight up and down, bro. Like, you can't even enjoy the fruits of your labor so long as there's all these hungry ass people around us. Like, just understand that part of it. Just for your own self-preservation, I would hope that people understood that point, because when it happened, I was just like, damn, it's so fucked up. You work your ass off. You climbing the ladders in the corporate, the corporate ladders, and you're doing this, and you do something nice for yourself, and some motherfucker come and take some shit off of you. And it's just like, damn, like, what's it worth? And it makes me wonder, like, yo, man, if motherfuckers had legitimate means to support themselves and could get a decent crib and a nice little whip and all of this shit by just, the opportunities that were afforded to them by the richest country in the history of civilization, imagine what type of lives we could live.
No, totally. I mean, and I think that, actually, I guess I would just say real quick, like, I think that sometimes the left, like, runs away a little bit too much from like talking about like crime or people being worried about street crime. Like, we think that if like we talk about that too much, that'll like legitimize like, whatever.
Nah, this shit's related to me.
No, it is. It's absolutely related. And I think that like, and I think we've got a good like message there because look, I mean, we don't even have to just talk about like what like the fully socialist utopia of the 23rd century or whatever. Like just look at like Norway, right? Like, Norway has way more lenient criminal justice system than we do. Like, even Anders Breivik's going to get out of prison eventually, right? Like, and so it's like way more humane, way more lenient than ours, but they have way less crime because why, right? Because they don't have an underclass of desperately poor people like side by side, with wealth, and so there's absolutely no reason, there's nothing magical about the, genetics of Norwegians that let them have that wouldn't let us too. I mean, we can have that here too.
Oh, you not a eugenicist? Damn, Ben, you disappointing me, bro. Racial essentialism ain't your thing? Damn. I'm disappointed, Ben Burgis. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, listen, Ben, thank you for hopping on today, man. It was last minute in our time of need, and you delivered as always. Fantastic. Tell the people where they can find you, please.
Yeah. So I write for Jacobin Magazine. You can find me there. Wrote a few books. You can just go to benburgis.com. You can find it all there. And the show is Give Them an Argument. We've been on a little bit of a hiatus with this lately, but I should say something we do for GTA patrons is that Waz, Nando, and our good friend Mike Racine all been joining me about once a month to talk about The Sopranos, and we will restart that soon.
Yes, sir. All right, you heard it here first. Make sure you guys are checking out all the other Counter Dings offerings. Friday mailbag. Pack Your Knives is back because Top Chef is back. So Tom Haberstroh, Kevin Arnovitz reviewing every single Top Chef, episode. Of course, Cinephobe with Amin Al Hassan, Zach Harper, and Tony Mays. the OG Bombshell. Y'all know everything that we got, man. And become a Patreon for a cup of coffee, a cup of Starbucks coffee every single month. You can support what we do here at Count the Ding. So we'll see you guys next week. Peace. Thank you, Benny, man.